The cold metal corridor of the broken station was silent. Except for the distant groaning of damaged walls, Ethan moved carefully, his boots making soft thuds as he searched for a safe place to wait out the storm of meteors outside. His breath was visible in the freezing air, and the dim emergency lights painted everything in red. He had seen many abandoned stations before, but this one felt different. It felt like someone was watching him. As he turned a corner, he froze. Therein, the shadows, was a small figure crouched against the wall. She was tiny, no taller than his chest, with pale skin that shimmered faintly even in the dim light. Her large, glowing eyes locked onto his, and she gripped a broken metal pipe with both hands. She looked like she was ready to attack or run. Her breathing was fast, and her thin shoulders shook as if she were freezing. Ethan raised his hands slowly, palms open, showing he had no weapon drawn. "Easy," he said in a calm voice, but the girl only pressed herself harder into the wall, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. He took a step closer, and she hissed a sound both sharp and scared. It wasn't hard to guess why. He had heard the rumors. Her kind believed humans were dangerous. Some even said humans ate the weak. It was nonsense, but if that's what she had been told, it explained the terror in her eyes. A loud rumble shook the station, making the lights flicker. Ethan glanced up, realizing part of the ceiling ahead was unstable, and she was sitting right beneath it. "Stay there, and you'll get crushed," he said quickly, moving forward. She swung the pipe at him, but he caught it with one hand, tossing it aside before she could react. A violent crack split the air. Metal beams and broken panels came crashing down. Without thinking, Ethan lunged. He wrapped his arms around her small frame, pulling her close and twisting his body so his back took the hit. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. Pain shot through him, but he held her tightly. Dust and sparks filled the air. When the noise faded, he slowly loosened his grip. She stared up at him with wide, stunned eyes. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. Ethan coughed and tried to smile. "You all right?" he asked softly. She blinked, still frozen in his arms. For a moment, neither of them moved. Finally, she pushed away, stumbling back a few steps. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you kill me?" The question hit him harder than the falling debris. "What?" he asked, confused. She looked down at the floor, her fingers twisting together. You had the chance," she murmured. "Everyone says humans would end me if they could." Ethan sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, everyone says a lot of stupid things," he replied. He took a slow step forward, but she tensed again, so he stopped. Keeping some distance, another tremor shook the station. Ethan knew they couldn't stay here. More parts of the ceiling could collapse. "Look," he said, "I've got a safe place nearby, warmer than this, no falling metal. You can stay there until the meteor storm ends." She didn't answer, just kept staring at him with those big, unsure eyes. Her body language screamed fear, but there was something else there now. Curiosity. He turned and started walking, glancing over his shoulder. "You can come or stay," he said. "But I'm leaving this death trap now." He didn't wait for her reply. The sound of his boots echoed down the corridor for a few moments. He thought she had chosen to stay. Then he heard a soft patter of lighter footsteps following him. He smiled to himself but didn't look back. Let her think it was her choice. When they reached his shelter, a reinforced cargo pod, he opened the heavy door. The inside was small but warmer. With a working light and a few supplies, she stepped incautiously, her eyes scanning every corner as if expecting a trap. Ethan moved to the heating unit, adjusting it until the soft hum grew stronger. "You can sit," he said, gesturing to a folded blanket in the corner. She hesitated, but finally lowered herself to the floor. Keeping the wall at her back, he placed a sealed food packet beside her. "It's safe," he said simply, then went back to his repairs. She didn't touch it, but she didn't throw it away either. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the hum of the heater and the faint rumbles from outside. When Ethan glanced over, she was still watching him. Not with trust, not yet, but with a little less fear than before. Outside, meteors streaked past the station. Inside, two strangers sat in the same small room, one wondering if he could protect her from what was coming, the other wondering if everything she had been told about humans might be wrong. Neither of them knew that this was only the first night of a bond that would change both their lives. The hum of the heater filled the small cargo pod. Ethan sat cross-legged near the door, tightening a loose bolt while keeping one eye on the tiny alien girl. She sat in the far corner, knees drawn to her chest, the blanket wrapped tightly around her small frame. Her glowing eyes followed his every move, not in trust, but in constant suspicion every time his hand moved toward his bag. She tensed, as if expecting a weapon. Ethan sighed quietly. It wasn't the first time he had met someone who thought humans were monsters, but this girl's fear was deeper, like it had been drilled into her since birth. He wondered who had told her such things, and why. The storm outside continued to rage, shaking the walls of the station. The occasional thud of debris echoed through the metal, making her flinch each time. "You've got to eat something," Ethan said gently, nodding toward the unopened food packet still beside her. She didn't move. "Not poisoned," he added, his tone flat but calm. "Still nothing." She kept the packet close, though, as if unsure whether to eat it or throw it away later. Instead of pushing, Ethan leaned back, resting his arms on his knees. He knew trust couldn't be forced. Sometimes you had to show, not tell. So he reached for another packet, opened it, and began eating slowly. She watched him with narrowed eyes. After a few bites, he left the rest and pushed it toward her. "See? Same food," he said, with a shrug. For a long moment, she stared at it. Her small hands hesitated, then finally reached out, pulling it toward her. She sniffed it first, wrinkling her nose, then took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly. It wasn't poisoned. Ethan pretended not to notice. Focusing on fixing the heating unit, sometimes ignoring, was better than hovering. Hours passed. The heater's hum grew steady, and the room warmed. The girl's shoulders seemed to relax just a little, though her eyes never left him for long. When Ethan lay back to rest, she pulled the blanket tighter around herself, her glowing eyes still open. He knew she wouldn't sleep while he was awake, so he closed his eyes and let his breathing slow, pretending to drift off. Minutes later, there was a faint rustle. Ethan didn't move, but he could hear her shifting. She got up quietly, her bare feet soft against the floor. For a moment, he thought she might try to escape. Instead, she stepped closer, just close enough to place the half-empty food packet beside him. Then she retreated to her corner again, curling up under the blanket. That small gesture told him something had changed. Not much, but enough. She had accepted his food. She had returned something of hers to him. It was a start. The storm outside grew worse, the air vibrating with every hit from the meteors. Ethan checked the walls and door again, making sure the pod would hold. The temperature inside dropped suddenly as the heater flickered. He cursed under his breath and went to work on it. It wasn't broken yet, but it was failing. Without it, the room would be freezing in minutes. The girl shivered in her corner. Her species seemed delicate in the cold, her skin paling even more. Ethan pulled off his thick jacket and held it out to her. She stared at it like it was a trap. "It's just a jacket," he said. "It's warm, take it." When she didn't move, he set it down halfway between them and went back to the heater. After a long pause, she slid forward, grabbed it quickly, and pulled it around herself. The jacket was far too big, almost swallowing her small frame, but the warmth made her sigh softly without realizing it. Ethan glanced back at her. She caught him looking and quickly turned away, pretending she wasn't wearing it. The heater finally came back to life, humming louder than before. Ethan sat back with a tired smile. "Better," he said to himself. The girl said nothing, but her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than before. The hours stretched into the night. Ethan drifted into a light sleep, his back against the wall. Somewhere in the middle of the night, the cold returned for a short while when the heater flickered again. A faint rustling woke him, but he didn't open his eyes. The sound grew closer, until something warm and small pressed against his side. Her weight was barely there, but the heat from her body told him who it was. She didn't say a word, didn't ask for permission. She just curled up against him, her small hands clutching the edge of his jacket as if afraid it would be taken away. Ethan didn't move. He just let her stay. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, for the first time since they met, she had chosen to be near him. The next morning, the storm outside had finally slowed. The shaking of the station was less violent, and only a few distant bangs echoed through the corridors. Ethan sat near the heater, eating a quick breakfast, while the tiny alien girl still wrapped in his oversized jacket sat across from him. She had eaten more of the food he offered this time. Though her eyes still followed his every movement, it wasn't trust yet, but it was something. He had just finished tightening his boots when a faint metallic thump echoed from far away. The sound was wrong to steady, too heavy. Ethan froze, listening. The girl's ears twitched slightly, her glowing eyes widening in fear. "That's not the storm," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan already knew the sound was boots too many. Moving fast, pirates, they came here often. Scavenger crews searching for anything they could steal, cargo, machines, or living beings to sell. If they found her, Ethan knew exactly what they would do. Her species was rare and hunted for profit. She wouldn't survive an hour in their hands. "Get in there," Ethan said quickly, pointing to a narrow storage compartment at the back of the pod. She stared at it, clearly not wanting to be trapped. "Now," he said firmly, his tone sharper than before. Reluctantly, she slid inside, curling herself into the small space. Ethan closed the panel, sealing her in darkness. Her faint breathing was the only sound before silence took over. The footsteps outside grew louder. Ethan grabbed his rifle and stood by the door. The lock was strong, but scavengers weren't known for knocking. A moment later, a loud clang shook the pod. The pirates were trying to force their way in. The first one stepped through the door with a grin, his armor patched and his breath stinking of stale air. Ethan moved before the man could even raise his weapon. "Hey!" Sharp strike to the jaw sent the intruder crashing into the wall. Two more rushed in, weapons ready. The cramped pod made it hard to move. But Ethan used it to his advantage. He shoved one pirate into the other, grabbing a dropped blade and swinging. Hard metal clashed, sparks flew. A shot rang out, grazing Ethan's shoulder. Pain flared hot, but he didn't stop. If they got past him, they'd find her. That thought alone kept him moving. The fight was brutal and fast. Ethan took a hit to the ribs, but managed to slam the last pirate in two, the doorframe knocking him unconscious. Blood trickled down his arm, his breathing heavy. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the heater again. Then silence. Slowly, he walked to the storage compartment. He knocked lightly. "It's me," he said. The panel slid open just enough for her glowing eyes to appear. When she saw him, her eyes widened, not in fear this time, but in shock. Blood was running down his arm, staining the fabric of his shirt. She crawled out quickly, her small hands gripping his sleeve. "You're hurt," she whispered, almost accusingly. Ethan tried to shrug it off. "It's nothing," he said, but his voice was rough. She frowned and pulled him toward the heater, making him sit from somewhere in her jacket pocket. She pulled out a small silver pouch. She opened it and began dabbing a cool, clear gel over the wound. It stung at first, then numbed the pain. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you get that?" he asked. She avoided his gaze, focusing on his shoulder instead. "From before," she said quietly. "I kept it in case I ever needed to escape again." Her hands trembled as she worked. Not from fear of him this time, but from something else. When she finished, she sat back, looking at him like she was trying to understand something. "You fought them for me," she said slowly. Ethan gave her a tired smile. "Yeah, well, I'm not in the habit of letting people get taken," he replied. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she quietly took his jacket off her shoulders and draped it over him. "You need it more now," she murmured. The gesture caught him off guard. For someone who had spent the first hours fearing he would kill her, she was now covering him with his own jacket like it belonged on him. That night, when the heater hummed and the danger was gone, Ethan drifted into a half-sleep. A soft movement woke him. He opened his eyes to find her sitting closer than before, watching him quietly. When their eyes met, she didn't look away. Instead, she whispered, "I don't understand you." Ethan chuckled softly. "Good," he said. "Keeps life interesting." She didn't smile, but she didn't move away either. And when he closed his eyes again, he could feel the faint weight of her leaning just slightly against him. The station was quiet again. The storm had passed, and the pirates were gone. But the air inside the cargo pod felt different now. It's not just warmer from the heater, but warmer because of something else. Something in the space between Ethan and the alien girl had shifted. She was still careful around him, but her eyes no longer looked at him like he was a monster. When he moved, she didn't flinch as much. When he spoke, she listened, even if she didn't answer. Her name, he had learned, was Leora. She told him one evening while sitting cross-legged near the heater. Her voice so soft he almost didn't hear it. He said her name once, slowly, and saw her shoulders stiffen, not in fear, but in surprise. It was as if she hadn't heard someone speak it kindly in a long time. That night, as Ethan worked on repairing his small communicator, Leora spoke again. "You are not like the stories," she said quietly. Ethan looked up. "What stories?" She hesitated, then hugged her knees tighter. "The ones about humans. How they hurt us, how they take what they want, how they eat us." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I've heard some of those," he said, "and they're wrong." She studied his face as if trying to find a lie there. But she found none. Days passed in slow rhythm. The heater's hum, the quiet meals, the sound of his tools clicking as he worked. Sometimes Leora would ask small questions about his ship, his home, why he was here. Other times, she would fall silent for hours, lost in her own thoughts. Ethan didn't push. Trust was like fragile glass pressed too hard, and it would shatter. One evening, the heater sputtered and failed completely. The cold crept in fast, biting at the air. Ethan tried to fix it, but the damage was worse this time. Without a full replacement, it would take hours to get it running again. He glanced at Leora. Her skin was already paling, her body trembling. Her species wasn't built for cold. If the temperature dropped much lower, she could freeze. Ethan grabbed the blanket and spread it on the floor. "Come here," he said, his voice calm but firm. She frowned, unsure. "It's too cold," he explained. "Body heat works faster than any heater." Her eyes flickered with hesitation, but another icy draft made her flinch. She slowly stepped closer, sitting stiffly beside him. He pulled the blanket around both of them, his arm resting loosely behind her. At first, she kept her body tense. Her hands were curled into fists, her breathing quick and shallow. Ethan didn't move, didn't force anything. He simply stayed, still letting the warmth spread between them. Minutes passed, and slowly, she relaxed. Her small frame leaned against his side, her head brushing his shoulder. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat seemed to calm her by the time the heater sputtered. Back to life hours later, Leora had fallen asleep against him. Her breathing was soft, her hands unclenched. Ethan didn't wake her. He just sat there, listening to the faint hum of the machine and the even softer sound of her sleep. When morning came, Leora woke slowly. Her eyes blinked open, and for a moment she seemed confused. Then she realized she was still leaning against him. She pulled back quickly, looking away. Ethan pretended not to notice, stretching and standing to check the heater. But he caught the faintest flicker of something in her expression: embarrassment. Yes, but also safety. Later that day, as he checked the station's structural map, Leora spoke again. "My people. They don't trust anyone," she said. Ethan glanced over. "Sounds familiar," he said. She shook her head. "No, not like me," she murmured. "They hide. Always. Even from each other sometimes." She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "But you don't hide." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why you're here with me," he said. That night, when the cold returned briefly, Leora didn't wait for him to invite her. She simply moved closer under the blanket. This time, she rested her head fully on his chest. Her fingers lightly curled into the fabric of his shirt, as if holding on to something she didn't want to lose. Ethan didn't say a word. Outside, the station was still dark and broken. But inside, something fragile and precious was being built, something neither of them had planned. The quiet inside the cargo pod was broken by the sharp buzz of Ethan's communicator. The screen flickered, showing a grainy map of the station. A distress signal was flashing in one of the far-off sectors. Ethan leaned closer, frowning. It wasn't just an old automated beacon, there were life signs. Multiple. Leora watched him, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice cautious. Ethan tapped the screen. "Survivors," he said. "Looks like a group is trapped in Section 7B." She froze, her lips parting in shock. "My people," she whispered. Ethan looked at her. "You're sure?" She nodded quickly. "I know the signal. It's one of ours." The map showed the bad news too. That section of the station had taken heavy damage. Its life support systems were failing, and oxygen levels were dropping fast. They had maybe a few hours before it became unlivable. Ethan stood and began checking his gear. Leora's hands tightened around the edge of the blanket. "You're going to them?" she asked. "Yeah," he replied without hesitation, her voice sharpened. "You'll die out there. The station is unstable. And if the pirates come back," he glanced at her, "if they're alive, I'm not leaving them to die." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at him as if she was trying to memorize his face. Her throat moved like she was holding back words. Finally, she spoke in a low, tense voice. "If you go, you might not come back." Ethan gave her a small smile. "Then keep the heater running until I do." He was halfway to the door when she moved. Her small hand caught his sleeve. Her grip wasn't strong, but it was enough to stop him for a moment. "I can't lose you," she said, almost too quietly to hear. Ethan's expression softened. "You won't," he said firmly, then pulled free and stepped out into the cold corridors. The station beyond the pod was darker here. Lights flickered weakly, and the sound of groaning metal echoed through the long hallways. Ethan moved quickly, but carefully, avoiding unstable sections where the floor sagged every few minutes. He checked the tracker, watching the blinking dots that marked the survivors. When he reached Section 7B, the air was thin, and the temperature had dropped sharply. Through a twisted doorway, he saw them 5 aliens huddled together in the corner. They looked weak, some barely able to stand. One of them, an older woman, spotted him and stiffened. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of a human. But before she could speak, Ethan tossed a small oxygen canister toward them. "Breathe," he said, simply. It took time to convince them he wasn't a threat. Finally, one Of the younger ones stepped forward. "You're Leora's human?" she asked. Ethan raised an eyebrow at the choice of words. "I guess," he said. The young alien's expression shifted. She gave a short nod. "Then we follow." Getting them back wasn't easy. The corridors had taken more damage since Ethan came through. At one point, a collapsed section forced them to climb over a jagged pile of debris. Ethan carried the smallest one on his back, his muscles straining but his pace steady. By the time they reached the cargo pod, he was sweating and short of breath. The door slid open, and Leora was there. Her eyes widened at the sight of the others, then locked on Ethan. Her gaze swept over him, searching for injuries. "You're alive," she breathed. "Didn't I say I would be?" He replied with a tired grin. The rescued aliens stepped inside, some collapsing near the heater. They murmured in their own language, voices low but full of relief. One of them glanced at Leora, and then at Ethan. There was something in there. Expression confusion mixed with respect. They clearly didn't understand why a human would risk himself for them. Leora stepped closer to Ethan. Her voice was softer now, almost uncertain. "You brought them back?" He looked at her and shrugged. "Of course I did." Her eyes glistened faintly. Though she tried to hide it, she glanced at the others, then back at him. "They don't know it yet. But you're not like anyone they've met." That night, while the others slept, Leora stayed awake, sitting near him. The heater's glow lit her face in soft gold. She didn't speak much, but every so often, her eyes would flicker toward him, not with fear, not with suspicion, but with something deeper, something she was only beginning to understand. 2 days passed since the rescue. The rescued aliens had regained some strength thanks to the heater, the food, and the oxygen packs Ethan had managed to find. They spoke quietly among themselves, often glancing at him when they thought he wasn't looking. Some still held a trace of suspicion in their eyes, but most had begun to see him differently. It was hard to deny what he had done for them. On the third morning, the station's comms system crackled to life. A rescue transport was approaching. It belonged to a safe colony where the survivors could be taken. The rescued aliens reacted with relief, their voices filled with hope. They began packing their few belongings, ready to leave. Leora sat in the corner, silent, her hands gripped the edges of the blanket around her shoulders. Ethan noticed her expression calm on the surface, but her eyes told another story. She didn't seem happy about the transport. When he approached, she looked up. "They'll want me to go with them," she said quietly. He nodded slowly. "It's safer," he replied. "You'll have your people, food, shelter." Her head shook before he could finish. "I had people before," she said, her voice sharper now. "I had food and shelter too. But I never had safety." Ethan frowned slightly. "You'd be among your own kind," he said. She stared at him for a long moment, then whispered, "Then why do I feel safer here?" The others called her name, telling her to prepare for departure. Ethan stepped back, giving her space if she wanted to go. He wouldn't stop her. If she wanted to stay, he wouldn't push either. It had to be her choice when the transport arrived. The survivors began boarding. The captain, a tall alien woman with silver markings on her skin, looked at Ethan with wary eyes. "You've done them a service," she said. "But this one," she nodded toward Leora, "she belongs with us." Leora stepped forward then, her blanket still wrapped around her like armor. "I'm not going," she said clearly. The captain blinked. "This isn't a choice, child," she replied. "He's human. I know what he is." Leora interrupted, her voice steady. "He's the one who kept me warm when I was freezing. Who fought pirates for me. Who brought you all back alive." The others shifted uncomfortably at her words. The captain's eyes narrowed slightly. "He can't protect you forever," she said. Leora's answer was simple. "Then I'll protect him too." The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan didn't move, didn't say a word. He could feel the weight of the choice she had made. The captain's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue further. She simply turned and stepped back onto the transport. One by one, the others followed, though a few gave Leora respectful nods before leaving when the transport door closed and the ship drifted away. The cargo pod felt strangely quiet again. Ethan finally spoke. "You sure about this?" Leora turned to face him, her expression softer now. "I slept on cold floors for years, always afraid of the dark," she said. "Now I sleep on your chest. And I'm not afraid anymore." Her words hit him harder than he expected, for a moment. He didn't know what to say. Instead, he simply nodded. "Well," he said, trying to keep his tone light, "looks like you're stuck with me then." Leora smiled faintly, just a small curve of her lips, but it was more than he'd seen before. "Good," she whispered. That night, when they settled near the heater, she didn't wait for him to invite her under the blanket. She just curled against him, her head resting over his heartbeat. Her breathing slowed, her body relaxing completely. Ethan stared at the dim ceiling, feeling the strange comfort of having her there. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing: she wasn't terrified of him anymore. Now she refused to sleep anywhere else but right there. The days after the transport's departure felt strangely peaceful. The station was still half ruined, and the hum of the heater was still their constant background. But the air between Ethan and Leora had changed completely. It was no longer filled with suspicion or tension. Now it was filled with something quieter, warmer. Leora moved around the cargo pod more freely. She no longer stayed pressed to the walls, no longer kept her eyes fixed on him like she expected danger. Sometimes, she even hummed softly to herself while helping him sort supplies. Ethan noticed the way she adjusted the heater settings for his comfort, the way she set aside food for him before eating herself. They didn't talk about it, but both of them felt the shift. One morning, Ethan stood by the small window in the pod, watching the stars drift slowly past. The storm outside had long cleared, and the station was calm. His communicator beeped, a signal from a nearby trade route, an opportunity. A small cargo vessel would pass by in 2 days, and it could take them anywhere they wanted to go. When he told Leora, she grew quiet. "Anywhere?" she asked, her voice low. Ethan nodded. "We could head to a colony, a city, even another world," he said. "Fresh start. Better supplies, no more leaking walls." She looked down at her hands. "And you?" she asked. He shrugged. "I go where I'm needed." Her eyes lifted to his. "Then I go where you go," she said without hesitation. They spent the next day preparing. Ethan packed tools, spare food, and a few scavenged items he could trade. Leora packed little, just the blanket, his oversized jacket, and a small pouch of her own belongings. When Ethan asked if she wanted to bring more, she shook her head. "Everything important is here," she said, tapping her chest, then glancing at him. The night before their departure, the heater flickered again. Leora was already beside him when it happened. She pulled the blanket around both of them and pressed closer. Her head rested over his heartbeat. "You know," she said softly, "the first time I saw you, I thought you were the end of my life." Ethan chuckled quietly. "And now?" She closed her eyes. "Now you're home," she whispered. The words stayed with him long after she drifted off to sleep. He realized then that he wasn't just taking her to safety, he was taking her into a future they would share. And he wanted that future more than he'd expected. When the small cargo vessel finally docked with the station, the airlock doors hissed open. The captain, a grizzled man with cybernetic eyes, looked at Ethan first, then at Leora. "You two traveling together?" he asked. Ethan nodded. The captain gave a short grunt. "Fine one cabin. Cheap fare, if you help with work along the way." Ethan agreed instantly as they stepped onto the vessel. Leora glanced back at the cargo pod that had been their home. Her glowing eyes softened. It had been the place where she had hidden, shivered, and feared for her life. But it had also been the place where she had learned what safety felt like. She reached for Ethan's hand, at first, lightly. Like she wasn't sure if she should. When he didn't pull away, she held it tighter. Their cabin was small, just a narrow bed, a storage box, and a tiny window showing the black of space. When night came, Ethan tried to sleep sitting against the wall, giving her the bed, but Leora tugged on his arm until he gave in. She curled against his chest as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The ship's engines hummed beneath them, carrying them away from the broken station. For the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone outside. The stars stretched endlessly. Inside, Leora's breathing was steady. Matching the rhythm of Ethan's heartbeat, he closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her trust and the warmth of her presence. Wherever they went next didn't matter. What mattered was that they would face it together. And she would never, ever sleep anywhere else but right there.